You're listening to today's inspirational message on the Proverbs with Bjorklund.
If we were to say that Proverbs 14 gives us some do not instructions, you could come up with many. I think there are two that are tied together here, one in verse 10, one in verse 13. And this is don't have unrealistic expectations. The first unrealistic expectation in verse 13 is that we can find lasting happiness. It says, even in laughter, the heart may ache, and the end of joy may be grief. And broadly applied, this teaches that when our expectation is too high for happiness, that we don't realize that happiness has limitations, that even in joy, even in laughter, there's a heartache. And we don't realize that happiness isn't lasting. Verse 13, the second half, where it says, the end of joy is grief. So even when everything's in place and joy is what we're experiencing, we know that there's sadness ahead. I'm reminded of that song that was done a few years ago that talked about one of us will die in the arms of the other, talking about a relationship and joy, but that is the end of how relationships work. And that it doesn't sound encouraging, but it's good to just remember that when we have an expectation that we can find all that we need in terms of happiness, that we will be disappointed. And then it's good in verse 10 to understand that our journey is somewhat alone. Don't expect unreasonable support. Don't demand unreasonable support. It says the heart knows its own bitterness, and no stranger shares its joy. The New Century Version says no one else can know your sadness, and strangers can't share your joy. No matter what kind of support you have or who walks closely with you, what this Proverbs teaches is that nobody knows the depth of your experience. No family member, no friend, no therapist can fully understand what's brought you joy and what brings you tears. Some people may be able to empathize with you. Some may be able to share insights with you. Some may be able even to understand what you've experienced, but ultimately your inner journey will always be somewhat of a lonely journey. You may not believe this initially because you may feel that you have people who've walked with you in deep bitterness, but Proverbs is saying if you demand unreasonable support, you will be let down. In the year 2000, my wife and I built a house. I was working long hours in a growing church and had pretty significant physical demands from trying to build this house, and it pushed me harder than I had really ever been pushed in my life. The church growth that our church had been experiencing stalled out in 2001, and there were several painful departures. People who I assumed we'd do life with and walk with for years left the church. And I entered into a season of self-doubt and probably even depression. And the more I tried to talk about it, the less anyone seemed to understand what I was experiencing. Well-meaning people tried to talk me out of it. They tried to challenge me out of it. They tried to spiritualize me out of it. Some people prayed, some judged, some simply assumed that it would all work out. I did come out of it, but it wasn't simple or quick. But in a way, I think I learned what this Proverb 14:10 really means, and that is it's unreasonable to expect that other people, even those with good intentions and even those with whom you've shared authentically or vulnerably, can enter into the deepest parts of your inner journey. In the big picture of hurts, and feeling abandoned by people and feeling the failure in my work was a pretty deep valley, but it was my own valley. The reason it's hard to share our lows is often we think that if we share vulnerably, people will really see us, and if they really see us, they won't love us. We may be loved when we're not fully seen, or we may be fully seen and not loved, but rarely are we both fully known and fully loved. And when we come face to face with this reality, we can fight it, we can run from it, or we can go to one who sticks closer than a brother, which is Proverbs 18, verse 24, I believe. There's one who's acquainted with your grief, who can share in your experience of grief. Jesus both knows the depth of your soul and loves you. It's good to be vulnerable with people, but remember that even this vulnerability has a limit. Otherwise, in fighting this reality, you'll find yourself reaching out to those who aren't trustworthy, or find yourself feeling deep disappointment after you've shared something significant and still feel alone. So let's be willing to risk relationally, to step toward happiness in our lives, but not demand or expect that either people or experiences will give us something that it never promises to give us. Only God can give us the experience of soul satisfaction in being known and loved, being accepted at all points of our being.
Thanks for joining us here today. There's a lot of great content to explore on Orchard Hill Plus and on the Orchard Hill main feed from the weekend. Have a great day.